Time Warner, I think across the board, they're taking a fairly cautious approach. I think, you know, the fact that we did at one point own Warner Brothers Records, the you know, the decline of the music industry is still fresh in everybody's mind. But I do believe that at least on the television side, because at Essence we just announced a joint venture with the Warner Brothers Television Group, who's going to be doing broadband and scripted programming for our site, as well as making a significant investment on the technology. So I work a lot with the folks at Warner Brothers, and you know, the traditional paradigms of media distribution aren't as rigid in their business anymore. 4 years ago, no one probably could have imagined that Hulu could exist. I don't know if you guys have seen, but Warner Brothers is launching the WB, the old network, as a broadband destination, where they are putting the entire Friends catalog online. You could mix it, you could search it, you could, you know, it's called the WB Blender. And I think that, you know, companies are being cautious, trying to retain their copyright, but they also realize that inherently this medium and sort of where the internet takes us is grassroots. And no matter how smart you are, or how many titles you own, or how big of a media company you are, the audience is going to tell you what they want. And so you can't really do all the driving. You have to sort of share with your audience, because, you know, we can all point to many, many, many news and entertainment ventures that haven't worked because they tried too hard to force a point of view or a direction on their audience. So, you know, I think it's exciting, and that's why I do like being in a big media company, because I get to see sort of both sides of the equation of, you know, people scrambling to figure out what's next, but then not wanting to overcommit. You know, a lot of people look at Fox and MySpace, and everyone's sitting back like, well, what is this going to be, and how are they going to monetize it? And, you know, so it's great to be having these conversations, and it's great that the digital sort of revolution has allowed people like myself to sit at tables that 5-7 years ago would not even have been an option. I think that's the case for women. I think that's the case for young folks. You know, we were joking last night sometimes at Time Inc. I walk into these rooms and it's sort of the malest, oldest place I've been ever. And I don't, you know, I'm sort of like, really? You guys are doing digital? You don't have cell phones that are smartphones? Like, what? You know? So it's exciting, and I think there is a real risk, but I think there's enough historical knowledge out there that people are going to figure it out, especially the big media companies. They'll just buy a solution.
Absolutely. You know, Hulu's a very interesting example. Do you want to comment on the life cycle of Hulu and how it's now taking off?
I mean, you know, Hulu is co-owned by Fox and NBC, and it's just had an incredible start. And, you know, all of our content from all the networks goes on to Hulu, and they're trying all the kind of new ad models. So, you know, hopefully it just won't, you know, pre-roll sitting through the, you know, painful where they don't even have a 5 or 10 second ad, it's a 30-second ad, you know, beforehand. And so they're gonna, it's a platform, and it's just run by some really smart people. So I think it has a lot of potential. You know, to us, it's one more platform.
But even in that situation, you know, the folks at Disney were not wanting to play with Hulu, and then 3 months they look at the traffic and it's like, okay, well now how can we be down? You know, so I think you have to sort of take some risks, some calculated risks, but you got to be free with your content. I mean, that's the one thing.
One of the biggest struggles really is that I think what the big media companies struggle with is they want to find the answer and keep it. They want to find the answer and keep it and make all the money from it. But what we are really finding and seeing is that the best answers come when there's that sort of openness and working together. And I think, you know, when Hearst started their digital unit, they thought, well, we'll do the magazine websites. And then immediately they realized they needed to forge important partnerships. And, you know, they bought Caboodle, which is a sponsor for BlogHer. And, you know, there have been a lot of very open sharing decisions that they do, and then Hearst also makes investments in other interactive companies so that they can get the look-see on how something works. And I think that that's really where the gains come from, is when there's more of that kind of fluidity and sharing.
And also an embracing of experimentation. Right. I mean, half the stuff we do kind of, Bravo's slightly ahead in certain areas in the interactive field, and half of it is just we experimented. We have absolutely no idea whether it's going to work or it's not going to work. Well, why not try? It's not that if it doesn't, you don't have to invest that much in some of the things to try. Right. And then if you can kind of figure out an interesting ad solution, as I like to say, advertisers are always looking for the next shiny new toy, right. And if you can monetize that, eventually they'll catch up and go, but give me the metrics, because those metrics, they always want those metrics. But in the beginning, as you're experimenting, sometimes they're willing to just kind of go with the flow and see where it goes if it's interesting. So I'm a big proponent of just go out and do it, and even if you're a media company, like do it now, apologize later.
I love the era of mistakes. I'm a huge proponent. I always say I want to make the best mistakes, and I appreciate that my company sort of lets me do some things under the radar and say, well, let's see what she learns by that weird experiment.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things when I started at Essence, I was the only person that worked there that had ever done anything in the digital space. And it took me about 6 months to convince them that we're never going to be done and it's never going to be perfect. Right. And you just got to accept that. We could sit here and try and figure out what exactly is going to make African American women want to log on every day to our site. And we could spend all sorts of money, we could put it up, and we could be wildly wrong. And that's one of the things that I like about this. Every Monday, you're either the hero or the goat. Right. It's either the greatest promotion ever done, or what were you thinking when you did that? So, luckily I've had more of the hero moments, but it's the nature of the beast. You're never going to know, and it's never going to be done.
That is so true. I want to make sure we open up to your questions now. I have about 17,000 more that I'd like to ask. Would anyone like to take the microphone and ask these women a question? I've got a hand up here in the front, and while the microphone's coming up, let me ask a question. You were talking about throwing spaghetti on the wall, right? Risking being the hero or the goat. But there's a real challenge in that scenario because there is a constant pressure from the grassroots level that you've invoked to tell personal stories, to tell stories that may not be a hero's story. They may be a goat from a traffic perspective. Right. And yet at the top, you all work for large for-profit media companies. And at the end, you have P&L responsibilities that don't just have to do with whether or not the audience likes it. So can you talk a little bit about that? The
reason that the Redbook site was so shallow when I got there was because they were like, well, sex is the only thing that works. And by the way, nobody actually reads anything on sex on the internet if you ask them. They're like, no. But it continues to be our #1 traffic driver without fail. And we launched a bunch of new sex properties. One of my favorite is called not the Hot and Bothered blog, it's Sex Life Road Test, where we take all the advice that we give in the magazine and then people test it. It's really screamingly funny, and I've been trying to turn it into a TV show for a little while. But so in any case, sorry, I distracted myself with that. And yes, the staff, we are all testers, and we all kind of look at each other like, was that you? But what I kept making the case was, look, I understand, and that's true, but this needs to be a 360-degree dimensional representation of what Redbook is. It doesn't help us in a long-term brand perspective to have this two-dimensional idea that Redbook is only sex, because last time I checked, my life isn't only sex. There are days I wish it were true and days I don't. But so what I did is, in launching the blog platform, I made sure that I put in a bunch of new stuff like Sex Life Road Test that served the beast. And then I said, just give me a long lead time to figure out. And we're so proud of the fact that some of our homegrown blogs, they're not in the top 10. Homegrown meaning our staff does them. We don't have any outside promotion. We've hired outside bloggers, and yes, we do pay them to bring their traffic, their expertise, and what they've done to our site. But we have 2 homegrown blogs. One of them is in the top 10, which is our sex blog, big shock. And then our other one, Serving Dish, which is a home and food blog, which unbelievably we think is going to tip to the point where it will be monetizable in another year. I mean, the growth on these things, it's just like little teeny tiny. But we're so incredibly proud of the fact that we were able to do that. And so, you kind of have to stand up and say this is what makes sense for the brand, and then kind of run away and get behind a screen and hope that they forget about you for a little while and come back. Now that we have the big digital group, we do have those kinds of Monday morning meetings where they're reminding me about all the spots on my site that aren't effectively making any money.